recorded about. All right. So if anybody is using this recording, you missed the first slide, sorry. Okay, can you do the next slide? I don't know where the little buttons are. Okay, so these are the 4 competencies. We're doing competency 1 today. If we have time at the end, I will show you some resources that are available on the Florida Department of Education website. That is where we got these 4 competencies. If you happen to be taking American government, they're also the exact same as the objectives for the American government class. But today we're going to be talking about understanding the basic principles and practices of American democracy and how they are applied to our Republican form of government. And then we'll get to the other ones throughout the semester. I'm not going to go over them today.
These are the key terms that we will be talking about. And in fact, this is like a table of contents for what each of the slides is called. So we don't need to read each, where you see that social contract, checks and balances, rule of law. We will be discussing each one of these individually. Yeah, so welcome. I'll get you the sign-in sheet, so we'll start.
Yeah.
Well, we got a couple more people.
Wow. Come on in. Thank
One
you.
person on
The
Zoom.
sign-in sheet will come to you.
Wonderful. Okay.
All right, yeah, if you'll go ahead and do the first slide. All right, so this is the first of those principles. And like I said, this is just going to be touching on the things you need to study. Yes.
Have you seen the test?
We have taken a sample test. And one thing I want you to know is the test. It's not like what date did this war happen. So that's why we're talking about principles, not facts. Okay?
Is it multiple choice?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, it is multiple choice.
And you don't have to get even 80 or 70%. It's 60%.
60%.
I was
And there are
shocked.
80 questions, you need a 60% on it, that's 40 correct answers.
I was shocked by that.
So the first principle we're going to discuss is the social contract. This goes all the way back to John Locke, and I meant to put his date.
Okay, they said the
Audio
audio
is cutting. Maybe I need to stand still.
Yeah.
I will try standing still for the folks on Zoom, and maybe you'll be able to hear me better.
Is that better? Yeah, you can put it in chat again.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, it's better.
Okay, I will try standing still. I don't teach standing still as a rule, but okay. So this goes all the way back to John Locke. He was a philosopher in I think the 17th century, and he developed an idea called the social contract. And so the idea of the social contract is the idea of self-government, that the government should be at the will of the people, not like the divine right, what they always had in Europe before that. The consent of the governed is a political idea that states that the only legitimate government is one in which power is derived from the citizens. So this idea of the social contract started way back in the 1600s, is a very foundational idea for our government. And if you were going to pass this test, you should probably at least have a general understanding of what that term means. All right, Jamie, the next slide is you.
Now, one of the things you may have heard about, raise your hands, everybody, say yes in the chat. Have you heard of checks and balances? Yes, we got about 4 hands up. Yeah, so checks and balances is a very common term that we all know about, but did you know why it's there and who came up with it? No, Montesquieu, another beautiful philosopher, Enlightenment person. And he wrote The Spirit of Laws in French. I'm saying it in English. And he decided that, like many of the people that were living then, we can't trust monarchs. We can't trust kings. Therefore, we need a system of government that will help protect the people from the people governing. So they were very, very concerned about this. And that's the reason when it says motivation, that's one of the motivations. They did not feel that the monarchs would allow them to have governed. And so they felt that the only way they could do this is have a separation of power. And that's why we have, if we look at the art later, we'll look at the founding documents. When you look at the Constitution, the first one that is there, Article 1, is the legislature, not the executive. Everybody thinks it's the president that rules. No, the Congress, and then the executive, and then the judges. So it's and the Congress, and when we read Article 1, it's the longest. Executive is smaller, and then the judges is even smaller. So you see, the Congress is built up of what the people representing us. So this was the biggest idea that they wanted. So we could talk a lot about this, but that's what you want to see: limited government. You know, this idea. So can we move on?
All right, so rule of law is another term you'll kind of need to understand, and it's limits on the use of power by government. That's, everything goes back to the Constitution. Everything goes back to what are the laws. Police can't just make up laws on the streets. Even your mayor can't just make up a law that is unconstitutional. That's why we're always asking, is it constitutional? Is it constitutional? Because the law, all goes back to law, not one person, not the law of the Medes and the Persians, as there's a place in the Bible that says the law of the Medes and the Persians can never be changed. This is different. This is based on rule of law. It limits the power of government. It is the restriction of the arbitrary exercise of power by subordinating it to well-defined and established laws. That's why sometimes this well-defined is important, because sometimes a law will be written and the judges will say, this law is too vague. It might not be a bad law, it's just too vague. We don't know who it applies to. Does it apply to everybody? Does it only apply to, you know, Hispanic people on a Thursday? Like, who is this law about? Okay, so well-defined, established law. All right, Jamie.
And as we do that, very important to law is due process. In fact, for this, I had a sound, and it doesn't work right now, of law and order. It's the process, the procedure, because guess what? The states would not sign the Constitution or ratify it until they had the Bill of Rights. One of these, you may know, is the Fifth Amendment. Fifth Amendment. Again, why they don't trust what could happen if it wasn't written in law. See, she would say all of these tie together. So if it's not written in law, then we don't know we will have that right. So due process, it started in the Fifth Amendment. Later, it was developed in the 14th Amendment, because you also have issues with the judicial system kept growing and their roles grew. And so now you have issues with states versus federal. And what are the rights? And so the 14th Amendment actually was developing the Fifth Amendment, but they're very similar. And so when somebody takes the Fifth, what do they have to incriminate yourself? And this you think is we take it for granted, but I had British friends. In Britain, it's the opposite. When you have like the right, they do give you like the Miranda right, that you have rights, but they say anything that you don't say now, you can't tell me later in your defense. Yeah. So if you wanted to say, hey, I know my alibi is I was committing adultery. You know, a lot of people don't want to say that. And they don't want to embarrass themselves, and they don't bring it up, and then they try to use it later. In Britain, you don't have that right. In America, you have the right to say nothing.
Right, and there are other amendments as far as due process as well. The Fourth Amendment covers illegal searches and seizures. Now, we're gonna have a whole one of these on the founding documents, including the Constitution. None of this is stuff you need to memorize today. I think you're like, your hand's gonna fall off. This is a guide to the SETI guide, okay? So just a basic understanding of what is due process. Due process means we have laws about how justice is carried out.
And most of them were made in the amendments. With the
Yeah.
Sixth Amendment, like she's saying, the Sixth Amendment also talks about like a speeding trial.
Yeah,
So those kind of things were done
Mhm.
because Britain fighting that with their monarchy.
right.
Mostly every single amendment we have in the Bill of Rights or didn't do.
Yeah.
So it has a historical
Mhm.
basis. So when you get the history, you'll understand the amendment.
All right, so equality under the law. This is another term that you should be familiar with, and this is treatment. And as Jamie said, equal protection, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about equal protection in a couple of slides. But equal protection forces the state to govern impartially, not to draw distinctions between individuals solely on differences that are irrelevant to legitimate government objectives. Now, one of the things that sometimes goes to the Supreme Court is, was it a legitimate government objective? Okay, can we discriminate between men and women for some legitimate reason? Can we discriminate between people who think this way and people who think that way for a legitimate governmental reason? So sometimes what the judges have to rule on is it a legitimate government objective? But laws should, now we know this has not been perfect in our history. That is one thing I always like to remind people. These are the ideals. The ideals have not been met for much of history, but these are the ideals that these things were founded on. So equal protection says that you cannot draw distinctions between individuals for no good reason. Now, this is very important. There is no guarantee of equal outcomes. For example, we say everybody gets to go to school, okay, but we can't guarantee everybody's gonna graduate and get a good job afterwards. We guarantee equal treatment, but not equal outcomes. All right, Jamie.
So the next one, this is something very, very important. In American government, we did not think of the original democracy. You guys know democracy? Do you know about Greece and Athens? Did they have a real democracy? Demo of the people, a real democracy, one by one vote. We do have a part of that in American government, but it is typically at the local level referendum. So in a referendum, we had like a penny something here, and people could vote yes or no. Every person voted, every person's vote actually counted. We have a republic that's representative. And so we're getting a popular sovereignty is coming in that every single person is able to vote, but we have a republic with representatives that represent us. And so a lot of people, when they're arguing, they don't understand the electoral college, which you'll understand more when you read one of the founding documents, which is tied into this Federalist Paper 81. And it will talk about a reason. Some states wanted to ensure their people were represented equally as people in a small state or a more populous state or a less populous state, which is why we have the system that is so crazy, our electoral college. So there are reasons for this, that it doesn't. But within everything, it's that we are the governed. We, the people, is the first in the first article, in a preamble. We, the people. And then even before that, the Declaration of Independence said, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So we are being governed. We give up something, but we are giving them the consent to rule us or represent us in a sense. Does this make sense? This is a very important concept.
This goes back to that very first slide about the social contract. The social contract is the idea that we live in a society. You've heard people say that. You can't just do that. We live in a society. We do live in a society. And we say we're not anarchists. We're not all going to do whatever we want all the time. We're going to allow these people to make rules for us so that we can have a society. It's a contract between us and our leaders. They make the rules. We benefit by having society. Once again, things aren't always perfect. It's a very messy system. Sometimes I wish we could have a fairy godmother who just makes all the rules and makes everything perfect. But we give them permission and they theoretically give us society.
And if we
Okay.
don't like it, what can we do? Vote them out, you know.
But for new people.
Yeah, so this is a very important concept to understand. Khan Academy gives a lot of quiz questions on this topic because you have to understand what they might give you. What does a referendum represent? And there you're going to say a democratic system. What does voting for a representative? And it will go back to this. So you're going to need to know this idea. Somebody has a question. Will we be able to access the PowerPoint later?
We're
Yes.
gonna send we'll
Yes.
send out the recording. All right, so this is sort of related to that social contract. So this is the idea that, and this is a very philosophical idea. Remember I said the test is really philosophical and not really date heavy? Natural rights refers to the rights given to all humans simply for the sake of being human. When we say that all men are created equal, and hopefully we're including women in that too, all men are created equal and are endowed with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Somebody born in Russia also has those rights. They're not American citizens. They might not have the right to a speedy trial because that's a given right. These life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That is what natural rights are. By being born as a human being on this planet, have these God-given, cosmos-given, evolutionarily designed, whatever you want to call them, rights simply for being human. That is what natural rights and laws are. And sometimes, once again, go before the Supreme Court. Is this a given right or is it a natural right? Believe that every human being should have this right, or is it only an American citizen? Okay, if you think back, say after 9/11, when certain rights were argued about, is this a human right? Is it a given right? Natural rights are the idea that some things are yours no matter what. And if somebody is threatening that, they are in the wrong. Okay, so natural law is a system based on a close observation of human nature and based on values intrinsic to human nature. Virtually any human being on the planet will tell you it's wrong to murder at least some people. Some people, now sometimes it's only people in your in-group that it's wrong to murder, but it's still wrong to murder those people in your family, your tribe, your country, your in-group. Okay, but almost everybody believes it's wrong to murder somebody. Okay, most people think you shouldn't take stuff that doesn't belong to you, at least a in-group. Okay, so these are considered to be natural laws. Once again, huge arguments about where those things came from. Why do we have them? But there's this idea in our government that at some level, we all believe certain things to be right, certain things to be wrong, certain things that, certain ways we should treat other people. That's natural rights and natural law. It's my favorite one to study ever.
And I like federalism. Then we can see federalism going on in our government today. If you watch politics for the last 2 terms, the Trump administration till now, because the big argument that kept happening within the beginning is, should we have a strong federal government? If you read the Articles of Confederation that comes between our Declaration of Independence, our freedom, and the Constitution, that made a very weak federal government. It was so weak, they had to go to the states to get money to pay for the soldiers. Now that's pretty bad. They weren't allowed to make their own money either. So they had to borrow money from states to pay debts to England and debts to France. Or, not England, France.
Yeah, we were fighting.
Yeah, we were fighting.
Maybe
And so-
Germany.
And so one of the things that you need to look at in the beginning, you're going to see a Federalist paper, anti-Federalist paper, and they both made arguments. We don't want that much government. Remember, government is bad. We don't want to be governed. And so this issue kept coming. And then later, you had states that were here as colonies before we had a federal government. They wanted their government power. So they wanted their sovereign power as well. So the Constitution had to strengthen the federal government, or we could never get rid of our debts. We were a mess. We couldn't have a good soldier or army or anything. So they started saying, what is the power of the federal government? What's the power of the state? And basically the states got the power that the federal government didn't take, which changes time to time. A state power, for example, how many people here have a federal driver's license? Anybody? I mean, you have a state one, right? Most people have. That was given to the states to do. So, and then within the states, they can also give some states are really strict, but like our state, I like our state. The counties have a lot of power in our state, in Florida. But some states, everything is pretty strong, but state level. So they have their own constitution that delineates that sovereign power. So that's what this is going to be about. And see, notice it wants you to see how has it influenced the development of the United States government, this idea of federalism. So when you're in your classes, it doesn't matter political science or AMC 2020, this idea will come up in one way or the other. And start thinking about it, like she said, in practical terms, because that's what kind of questions they'll give you. That makes sense? I hope. I like federalism.
Okay, so individual liberty. This has to do with political and religious liberty, our personal liberties. I only religious liberty because I couldn't find a specific political liberty one that I liked. The political liberty is like your freedom to join whatever political party you want. Okay, nobody's going to make, there are countries where there's one party. There might be 20 parties, but there's really one. Okay, we at least have the two, and you can join the Green Party or the Independent Party or the Communist Party or whatever. That is political freedom. Religious freedom. Religious liberty is enshrined in the text of our Constitution and in numerous federal statutes. Americans to exercise their religion freely without being coerced to join an established church or to satisfy a religious test as a qualification for public office. As Jamie was saying, we're kind of doing, we want to do what the opposite of what the British were doing at the time. The British, they were always fighting about which church it was, but it was like either the Protestant church was in power and all the Roman Catholics were dead or in hiding, or the Catholic Church was in power and all the Protestants were dead or in hiding, we said, you don't have to be any, cannot have a state religion. We cannot say everybody has to be Christian, or everybody has to be Muslim, or everybody has to be, have crystals in their window. Okay. And just because it is that thing doesn't mean we have to be. And qualify for public office. Okay. Now, once again, we've been working towards that ideal. We now have Muslim people in Congress and in the Senate. We have Jewish people, we have non-religious people of any kind. So we're getting closer to the ideal, but the ideal is you cannot be made to join a church, and you don't have to fill out a statement of faith to run for office. You might have to fill out a statement of faith to be a church secretary, but you don't have to fill out a statement of faith to run for office. All right, so history and contemporary practice. Here I've just kind of put what you want to know. You want to know how individual liberty is treated in an autocracy, a democracy, a monarchy, an oligarchy, a republic, and a city. Okay, we cannot go through all those terms today. But, monarchy, one king or queen, and they get to decide what the state religion is. But how is that different? Or a theocracy? A theocracy means rule by God. There are countries that are theocracies. All the laws are based on religion. You also want to talk about economic systems, going back to this political and religious liberty. Which economic systems give the people most liberty? Capitalism, communism, mixed market, socialism. These are big ideas that we do not have time to cover today. But you want to think about what kind of individual liberty is there in a socialist government versus a capitalist government, etc. All right, Jamie, I think I'm ready.
So this is with the, back to, see, they all relate, all these
Yes.
ideas relate. Notice republicanism with the capital R. This is talking about, if you take a citizenship test, they'll say, what kind of government is the United States? It's a Republican. It's a republic. So you have to remember, they say representative republic. But it's important to know, this is a Democrat and Republic. In fact, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party historically were opposites at one time. So, I mean, it's not talking about the parties with a small r. It is talking about the actual form of government, which we already said it's ruled by the governed. And here, notice what's being underlined, the constitutional guarantee of the republic, that we have the right to govern until we represent and have representatives to represent our ideas. So it's also important what she was saying, you had the theocracy and you had oligarchy and all those forms. Here you need to know, where did you get the idea of democracy? Where did you get the idea of republic? And so democracy goes all the way back to Greece when they dated in the past. I'm sure they could have been, if there was an Adam and an Eve, I'm sure, they take two vote, what vote counts more, I don't know, with the kids, but it goes back to Greece. And then with the republic, many people look to Rome. And so versus what I don't know what a lot of people think, but actually many of these people were looking back to Rome. And the Senate, that's why they have a Senate. And why do they have a House? They had the same idea of senators in the Roman republic.
And this is one I actually got wrong on the practice test, because I put that it went back to Greece because I was thinking democracy, not republic. So even people who study this, you get tripped up. I put Greece instead of Rome on the practice test. So yeah, Greece, democracy, Rome, republic.
Yeah, and here when they're saying the difference between Republican and Democratic RD, they're not saying the two parties, what's the difference between the two parties? Just what's the difference between capital Republican versus a little Republican? One is a political party, and a democratic government, which is vote by vote, versus the Democratic Party, which is a small d. So when you take the test, they usually say didn't they say party a lot? The Republican
Yeah,
Party,
right.
Democratic Party. So when they meant the party, they used the word party
Yeah.
beside it. So it was a way to tell. And this poor picture got
in front of the text.
I'm so sorry. So it says how the United States functions as a constitutional republic. And we know here, you're going to be looking at the three parts of our government, and you're going to see how they interweave with each other. And we're going to be doing the Constitution. And remember, Article 1, 2, and 3 actually answers that question. So, and then why did the founders not want a purely democratic form of government? If you read Alexander Hamilton, again, he wrote 2 or 3 of the Federalist paper. He not only didn't trust the monarch, he didn't trust human nature. And so he was afraid that if you let every person individually vote, that you would have mob mentality. And he didn't want that either. So that's in the Federalist paper, I think number 10, and we'll look at that later. So he didn't think people were good either. So the monarchs are bad, people's human nature is bad. Yeah.
So we have to find a balance.
We have to find a way to, yeah, it makes sense, yeah, because, yeah, so you'll see that.
All right, so the Constitution, constitutionalism, like we said, there's going to be like a whole thing on just the Constitution. The constitutionalism is government based on a constitution. Okay. Adherence to a constitutional form of government, and it has philosophical and practical foundations. Now, I took this straight from the study note that we're going to look at in a bit. Students will recognize the influence of the Judeo-Christian tradition, republicanism, and English Constitution and common law, the European Enlightenment in establishing organic laws, and the primary documents, going all the way back to the Magna Carta in 1215. Mayflower Compact, the English Bill of Rights, Common Sense, which was a document published right before the war, Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of Massachusetts, the Articles of Confederation in the Northwest Ordinance. So these, when we talk about founding documents, this is what we're talking about. So our Constitution is based on a philosophical background of all these other documents.
What was the common sense like document? What did they entail?
It was a pamphlet, and I read it in high school, but I haven't read it since, and that was a long minute ago.
And what the purposes of the 1776 documents was to get people fired up.
And that's really what common sense was. These are the reasons we should go to war. These are the reasons why we should declare independence. These are the reasons why we should go to war.
So you can use the dates as clues, like
Mhm.
Declaration of Independence. It's much more hopeful and bright than the Constitution, which is dry reading.
And practical.
Yeah, because
Yes.
he wanted people to let's get fired up. We want to go against, England. So they needed.
So common sense was in Thomas Paine's idea, the common sense reason why we should go to war. So one thing I want to point out is that this test is very reliant on foundational ideas. Not necessarily what the Supreme Court has said since then, not necessarily individual state laws. It's very much on these foundational ideas, going way back from 1215 to 1789. So be thinking about what are these, what did the founders think about this? What did the foundational documents think about this? All right, Jamie, I think we're ready for you.
Now, this is one of the biggest, again, it kind of goes back to the Electoral College, the idea of majority and minority. And these issues were very much the very issues that they were writing in order, are we going to sign the Constitution or not? This is what these ideas, these two could have made or broke our nation, because we had states that refused to ratify the Constitution. And it said every state had to ratify it to be a nation. We only had 13 colonies, and they couldn't make a decision. So the Federalist and non-Federalist papers are actually arguments between the people that wanted a strong federal and non-federal, but also these ideas were there. There's a guy named Brutus, I don't remember which person he really was, because the anti-federalists took on names of people that were Roman, but Brutus thought that a large, all 13, that was large back then, all 13 together, it was too large to rule. So he wanted it to be small. So that's why he wanted more state rights. Whereas Madison was saying we need to have a larger one for many reasons. And when you're thinking majority rule, minority rule, one of the interesting points that Madison brings up, he said the rich minority could take over the rights of the majority. So he was not just bringing up the sense that we do minority, your minorities in the class, if you're Black, females, Hispanic, whatever, if you're blind, any of those people could be categories today of minority groups. He was also seeing the very rich as a minority taking over. So he said that factions, it sounds crazy, factions of groups, if you let them be factions, they could fight one another and balance the power. So he actually, his paper, when you read the Federalist paper number 10, it is so powerful that judges today go and look at it to see what were the founding fathers thinking about these kind of rights. So I know most of the time when you see minority, you automatically think of the poor, oppressed people, where he was thinking, I don't want the rich to take over the majority of the poor people, so it was a different type of thinking in what he was saying.
Does anyone know what a rich few is? By a rich minority?
That's one of the words.
Oligarchy, very good. One of those terms that we talked about earlier. It's ruled by a rich minority. Oligarchy.
Yeah, that's
One of those terms we talked about a few minutes ago.
Yeah, so you'll find that most of the people did not believe in a direct democracy. That goes here too. And one reason not for the direct, he didn't trust people. So yeah, you have this large majority you want to protect against the rich, but at the same time, we can't trust that large majority because they could be mob violence. So.
Right. And also, if the majority is all one kind of person, you want to protect the minority from the majority. You have to balance majority rule. We want the majority to rule in most things, but we also want to protect the rights of the minority. It's all a balancing act.
Yeah, so I find it, but this one we could talk about forever, and we will talk about it more when we do the founding documents, because for sure Federalist number 10 has to be looked at. It has to be. We're going to pick which one we want to talk about. Now,
Jamie's probably going to talk about Federalist 10.
Yeah, I love that.
All right. Equal protection. We talked about equal protection a little. We talked about equality earlier. This is equal protection specifically. We're going to talk specifically about the 14th Amendment. And this is the same thing we said earlier, that they have to, you can't make laws solely on differences that are relevant to legitimate government objectives. But then we get into the 14th Amendment, which we call the Equal Protection Clause. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizenship of citizens. The 14th Amendment talks a lot about what is a citizen, who is a citizen. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. So Jamie had a slide on due process. 15 slides back or something. Nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. I cannot think of an amendment that gets argued more in front of the Supreme Court than equal protection. Okay. So the thing with the guy who wanted to make the cake for the, or didn't want to make the cake for the gay wedding, that was an equal protection argument. The right to privacy and abortion laws, that's an equal protection argument. Just about, you think of it, something that's been in the Supreme Court in the last 5 years. I mean, unless it's like, even things like, can companies give money to politicians? Are companies covered under equal protection?
Oh, yeah.
That came up 15 years ago or something. That was an equal protection argument. If two people are arguing under the law, it's an equal protection argument. We have to protect this side, their religious liberties, this side, their right to privacy, this side, their right to freedom of expression versus this side's right to safety. Okay, so equal protection laws. Read this one. Go read the 14th Amendment, because it's going to give you more information about what's going on in the world today than just about anything else, because this is the one they're always fighting about. And that's probably the main thing you need to know about. Equal protection is the 14th Amendment, and it's the one we fight about the most. Because it's kind of like who's the most equal in some ways. Who has a protected status under the law?
And that kind of relates to this Bill of Rights, protection of civil rights and liberties. So the Bill of Rights in part was to limit government. And we brought that up several times. We want to limit government. We don't trust them. And here the anti-federalists won. The anti-federalists would not have signed if we didn't have a Bill of Rights. The Federalists were saying, we can trust our presidents or the executive power. And they're saying, we don't trust government. No, no, no. So they wanted to take away power. So you could see it with gun. The Second Amendment's a big one always.
Another,
You
yeah.
see in the court, we had the right to have guns is a big issue. That comes from the Second Amendment. But one that you can look at just to see, just because you have a right, like say we have the right to assemble. When we assemble, does that mean we have a right to take a pickup truck and drive it through somebody else and say, well, I was assembling? No, you have limits when you're assembling. You shouldn't be doing any other parties, which we've been seeing recently when people are assembling. So the right to assemble is there, but they also have within a right, there may be limitations. And that's where the fine lines come, where people will argue. And some states, I think DeSantis was trying to make some limitations on the rights to protest. Yeah.
Are the limits described in the Constitution?
No, that's why it comes by. So people will say, I'm allowed to assemble. And at first, they used to assemble without getting permits. Yeah, they used to just gather. And then people say, well, we can't have people doing this all the time. And so a state might say, I want you to get something from us to be allowed to assemble. And if people don't take it to the Supreme Court, they say, okay, they're always saying yes, yes. They're never saying, if they start saying no to a specific group of people, guess what will happen? It'll go to the Supreme Court.
But we like after school clubs for kids. Can you have a soccer after school club? Can you have a good news club, like a Christian after school club? Okay. Can we have a Satanist after school club? And that's, equal protection.
Yeah.
And it's to freedom.
So it starts, each of those points come. And there were some school clubs. When we look at schooling, because that's part of this, is one part what is it, three?
3 or 4.
Yeah, you're
Court
gonna
rules.
just look at different court rulings. It's really interesting to look at some of them because they have some in a school where the freedom of speech of the students was taken away.
Mhm.
And you can go and read, why did the judges do this? Judges, the Supreme Court doesn't always get it right. Remember, they were still saying separate but equal, black schools, white schools. And then it's still, people say, hey, these are not equal. And that they were able to go back to the Supreme Court and that was overruled.
Mhm.
So they don't always get it right and you might see changes. It's interesting to see the process.
Right.
It's amazing.
So you have, so as Jamie was saying, you to kind of answer your question, the Bill of Rights says freedom of speech. Individual states put limits on that freedom of speech, or cities or schools or whatever, put limits on that freedom of speech. Okay. And then we can take it to the Supreme Court or various courts. It goes in stages. You take it in stages and say, is that protected under the freedom of speech? I can't cuss out my boss and still expect to have a job. Okay, I can cuss out my boss and not go to jail, depending, as long as I didn't threaten her, right? Okay, because that's the government. But I can't expect to have a job the next day. There are limits on all of these things set at various levels. So,
And so this is going to be really interesting when you look at see it has historical and contemporary. And you'll want to look at each of like the Bill of Rights and say, what is the limitation within that in modern times? Because there's only 10 Bill of Rights, 1 or 2 we don't like. We're not worried about soldiers breaking into our house.
houses and yeah.
But at the time, back then, British soldiers did do that.
Mhm.
So, but now we're not worried about stuff like that. So it probably might be 7 or 8 we can look at and say, what is the limitation, of those? And sometimes it can go on the right of the other, the Miranda rights. They were added because they said this individual had the right not to incriminate himself, but he wasn't aware that he had the right. And so that's what the court took, and he actually won that court. Well, other people would say, well, too bad, ignorance is, what is it, bliss?
Yeah, no, ignorance is no excuse.
Ignorance is no excuse. Yes. Yeah, so.
We're also blessed.
Yeah.
We got 10 minutes, Jamie. I don't know how many slides
Okay.
we have
I
left.
think
but-
we're-
Okay, good. We're doing good. Okay, elections. Yes, this is the last one.
Yeah.
Okay, free, fair, and secure elections. This is another concept that is foundational to our government. And that's what we're talking about, is concepts that are foundational. That we will have free, fair, and secure elections. And some things you'll want to look at are things like trends in voter turnout, attempts to increase voter turnout, such as social movements, such as the civil rights movement, how government actions have affected voter participation. So we've got lots of amendments, the 15th, the 19th, the 26th, that all deal with voter turnout. Poll taxes, efforts to suppress voter turnout. Things that are happening even yet and still today. Be aware of those things. And then how elections work. The different primary formats and how political parties nominate candidates using primaries. We're just about done with primary season for the midterm elections. We're going into the actual elections. Understand, what is a primary vote? How does that work? The different ways in which elections are decided. The Electoral College, which Jamie referred to earlier, proportional representation, popular vote, winner take all. Different kinds of methods of tabulating votes, essentially. The process by which candidates register to be part of state and national elections, and the different methods used to tabulate election results in state and national elections. Electronic voting, punch cards, fill-in ballots. You look like the only person, I'm not being rude, who might remember punch cards.
I'm actually Canadian.
Oh, so you weren't here for. That's why you're here. All of the rest of you were probably, right? Okay. Punch cards were a big deal in Florida in the year 2000. If you ever want to watch some hilarious news footage, Google hanging chads. Because there were these ballots that hadn't been fully punched. So they had to like punch a hole for the candidate they wanted. And they were counting all the votes in Florida and they were trying to decide if it was going to be George W. Bush or Al Gore. And Tallahassee has never been busier in my life. I've lived here my whole life. We had CNN helicopters over the state capitol. It was a crazy time. So actually, like the difference between an electronic vote and a punch card vote actually matters when it comes to how your voice is represented in government. Because a bad punch card is not going to do the trick. They made certain kinds of ballots actually illegal after the 2000 election. So,
and that's how the federal government has a good voting law. And like, for instance, each time every 10 years we do the census. If you remember the legislature, when you have the House of Representatives is based on population. Florida gained at least one seat.
We've gained one seat.
At least one seat. So that gave the government of Florida the opportunity to redo where we vote from, our legislative or congressional districts. And when they did it, they actually, there's already a court, it's in court right now, that I live in Frenchtown. They fixed it so they the black vote, I happen to be white living in Frenchtown, but they did it with the idea that less black people, there used to be a group of black people, a person like Al Lawson, who's black, he was being voted in by his people he represented, black person, black government. And I would have voted because he's a Democrat. I like what he stands for. But they went to court because when they did it, they cut that line, and it's what they call a gerrymandering, because it used to look like a salamander. And this is going to court because we're going to the federal court immediately when we voted. I actually got a new voting card. I was supposed to go right back to where you vote until that comes out back from court. You're voting exactly in the district you voted in.
So many things affect how elections work. Who's the Secretary of State for that state? How do they count votes? Are there observers? If you've been paying attention at all to the news, now some of you might not care, but if you've been paying attention at all to the news, how votes are counted has become a big deal here lately. Okay, Jamie and I are trying to keep our politics out of this, but sometimes you just get so like about things. But yeah, how votes are tabulated matter just as much as who can get there to vote to begin with. Okay, it all matters. And y'all are young and y'all are probably voting, some of you for the first time, so pay attention. Okay?
That's a question. For the electoral college, do they have to vote with what they represent, like the state of Florida, do they have to, or can they change?
They're
They're
really supposed to vote with how the state voted.
And most do.
Most do. Every once in a while you'll have an ornery one, but most of them do.
And I like some states, they break their electoral vote
Based on popular vote.
The popular vote.
The Florida is a winner take all state.
Yeah, winner take all.
Which is one of the terms we had somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, winner take all.
So each state
So
is
Each
different.
state, that's one of those things, election, we talked about federalism versus state. The federal government says they have to be free and fair. The states decide how they're actually run.
So
Okay.
I love the ones that, because I did, I was surprised when I saw that one state did it exactly by the proportion. So if they have 50 and 50%, 25 of the electoral votes. I wish Florida did that.
Can I show them the resources? We've got about 2 minutes left.
Of course.
Do you want to hand out surveys while I show them? All right, we're going to do a new share.
And don't forget Khan Academy if it's not on the list. It was one of my favorites.
What is Khan Academy?
It's a website, if you type up, it does teaching for high school, college, GED. You can do club test training with it. So it's a free, and I guess it's Khan who wrote it. I think Khan was the last name of the person who invented it. And it was an academy, it's like a school. So, and they have every subject. Their art one is perfect. Their history one is perfect, not perfect. I like their history and I like their art. Their math, my grandchildren said it's boring. But yes, but thank you.
Okay, this is probably if you want to study more, this is where we got all our information. I'm on the Florida Department of Education website, and I have to, it's kind of convoluted how you have to get there. I always just put in Florida literacy exam competencies, but you want to come down here under FCLE supplemental guide and sample test. Remember I told you we took a sample test? It's here. Okay. And then the supplemental guide is, you can see the 4 competencies, and then everything we just talked about, the social contract, John Locke, content of the government, all these terms we just threw at you, they're all right here. Okay. And you can click on them. So one of the things Jamie said, why the founders did not favor a purely and sort of with more information about that. Okay. So we, like I said, we just covered it all in 58 minutes. There's so much more that you could learn about all of this. This is where I would go and start clicking on those links. Okay. Especially, if you just really, you're Canadian, you just really want to learn it. This would be probably a good place to start. Okay.
How much, can you estimate how many hours of study was required to pass the test?
Oh, to pass the test, I don't know. Like I said, you only need a 48, or you only need a 60%. You need 48 correct answers.
Well, plus it depends how much you know
Already.
And we don't know what you know, what you don't. Yeah.
So I really can't, because honestly, I have not clicked on every single one of those links. I kind of went with either what I already knew, quick searches, I was just trying to give you an outline view. So I don't know how long it would take to actually do it. But you don't have to know all of it. And if you get a basic understanding of those concepts, if you can get that, I think you're good. Like I said, you don't have to memorize a bunch of facts and statistics.
Well, they did ask who penned the Declaration of Independence.
Okay.
Who penned the Constitution. So that, yeah, they used the word pen.
Penned, like actually wrote the words.
Yeah.
So I want the survey. That's what I'm looking for. And to send to the people who are online.
So
Quite
any
a few.
questions?
Is it time?
That I don't
I
know
don't
for
think
sure.
it-
I don't think I'd ever thought of that.
I don't think it, I've never heard, because I've known 3 people that took it. I can check with them and see. But I don't think it had a time. You just read it and then you sort of what. If you don't know, you guess, take your best shot. Don't leave anything empty, you don't get negative points for not getting it wrong, that people.
Jamie, why can't I get, there we go. Okay. Okay, those of you who are with us online, thank you so much for your patience with any technical issues we have had. And I am going to put, the test does not cost money. We're not going to put it in Canvas, but we probably are going to send the recording out to everyone. Here is the link to the survey.
They sign them online.
No.
Okay, everybody, just put your email into the chat. We're gonna copy and paste it. So we know, number 1, where to send the PowerPoint. And number 2, for our record keeping for attendance.
Yes.
So if you just type your email we'll have it. And then we'll copy and paste it. And this is 1 of 4. And how many people are taking POS or AMH right now? Yeah, see, so you're taking it and you know now more what to focus on as you're taking the test. And I don't know, I looked at like American history, depends who the instructor, how much they dive into the Constitution. Because I like one of the teachers, they'll say, you have the three power, separate powers of government. Which one is the strongest? It's supposed to be equal. And then you have to justify it. Yeah, and then you have to, and say you said it was the executive was the strongest. Then you'd say, well, what do you think the legislator would say about that? And then you have to, and then you have to do it with it. So by the time you're over, you know those three